They built the world's first cities, wrote the first great work of literature, and forged the first-ever empire. And then, their entire civilization vanished from human memory for over 4,000 years. The story of civilization begins in a fertile crescent of land known as Mesopotamia, a region cradled by the powerful Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Its very name, which translates as the land between rivers, hints at the unique conditions that allowed humanity's first grand society to blossom. This was a land of stark contrasts. While a formidable and severe desert encircled the territory, the rivers themselves were a life-sustaining artery of fresh water, essential for existence. The summer heat could be absolutely brutal, but each year the rivers would overflow their banks, depositing a rich layer of nutrient-packed silt across the floodplains. It was in navigating these environmental challenges that the resourcefulness and resilience of the region's inhabitants were forged. Around the 7th millennium BC, the first permanent communities, established by what we now call the Ubaid culture, began to take root. Discoveries at sites like Tel al-Ubaid reveal the earliest known mud brick constructions, which provided the groundwork for the planet's first urban centers. These early trailblazers lived in a world without metal tools, written language, or royalty. Despite this, they successfully laid the groundwork for all of these profound developments to come. The defining turning point for this ancient land was the development of irrigation. By cleverly digging canals, early Mesopotamians could redirect the volatile river waters, transforming destructive floods into a manageable asset. This mastery over water allowed for the cultivation of previously barren lands, leading to agricultural surpluses on a scale previously thought impossible in such an arid climate. An extraordinary new experiment in human social organization was sparked by this marriage of geography and innovation. From these humble beginnings, a remarkable civilization emerged during the Neolithic period, one that would establish the blueprint for urban life, invent the world's first writing system, and achieve technological advances that still resonate today. Humanity's first steps toward societal complexity in southern Mesopotamia are marked by the Ubaid period, named for the key archaeological site of Tel al-Ubaid. These pioneering settlers created a distinctive style of pottery, adorned with black-painted geometric designs on a greenish clay background. For archaeologists, these artifacts act as crucial guideposts, enabling them to trace the expansion of Ubaid culture. What began as simple ceramic forms eventually evolved into elegant vessels with sophisticated decorations, suggesting the rise of specialized craftspeople who dedicated their lives to mastering their trade. The architecture of these early villages also reveals an increasing social intricacy. Initially, settlements consisted of small, round huts woven from bundled reeds, a plentiful resource in the local marshes. However, by 6000 BC, a new style appeared: rectangular homes built from sun-dried mud bricks, arranged around shared central courtyards. This architectural evolution was a physical manifestation of a changing social fabric, indicating a move away from isolated family units toward larger, more integrated households with communal workspaces. Botanical analysis from these ancient sites shows a deep and practical knowledge of farming. Cultivators grew six-row barley, emmer wheat, and flax, utilizing crop rotation to maintain the land's productivity. Date palms were a vital resource, offering not only fruit but also welcome shade and building materials. Kitchen gardens within the villages yielded onions, garlic, and beans, supplementing a diet centered on grains. This agricultural strategy was rounded out by fishing, hunting for waterfowl, and raising livestock, which created a diverse food system resilient to the failure of any single source. During this era, the first signs of a social hierarchy began to emerge. Evidence from burial sites reveals clear distinctions in the items interred with the dead. Some individuals were buried with only simple ceramic pots, while others were laid to rest with rare materials like obsidian and lapis lazuli, which had to be obtained through extensive trade networks. These differences strongly suggest variations in status, wealth, or influence within the community. The very intricacy of the irrigation systems also implies the existence of a central authority capable of coordinating labor. as such projects required planning and maintenance far beyond the capacity of individual families. Religious life revolved around communal shrines that grew steadily more complex over time. At a site called Tel Abada, a tripartite temple was unearthed, featuring a central hall flanked by smaller chambers, a floor plan that would become the standard for Mesopotamian sacred architecture for thousands of years. Ritual objects found within these early temples often include female figurines, pointing to a spiritual focus on themes of fertility and abundance. The increasing scale and sophistication of these religious structures reflect a growing collective investment in a shared spiritual infrastructure. The most prominent settlement of this foundational era is widely considered to be Eridu. Situated near a now-vanished lake in modern-day southern Iraq, the site is home to the oldest known temple in Mesopotamia. Excavations have uncovered an incredible sequence of 17 shrines built directly on top of one another, representing more than 2,000 years of continuous worship. The original holy structure was a humble mud brick platform, but with each successive reconstruction, the temple became larger and more elaborate. This long process culminated in a sprawling temple complex dedicated to Enki, the god of the freshwater abyss and the patron deity of wisdom. This sacred precinct set the stage for the monumental religious centers that would define later Mesopotamian cities. The transition from mobile camps to fixed villages was a profound transformation of the human condition. Where nomadic hunter-gatherers had followed animal herds and seasonal growth in small bands, these agricultural pioneers established permanent communities tied to a specific territory. The concept of property began to form as families invested their work into homes and fields intended to be passed down through generations. The ritual calendar became intertwined with the agricultural cycle, creating shared rhythms of life that bound the community together. Seeds were meticulously selected and preserved, and each harvest came to represent not just sustenance for the coming year, but an accumulation of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. At the very heart of Sumerian civilization was a revolutionary concept: the systematic management of water. Long before the first ziggurats cast their shadows across the land, these early farmers were constructing intricate networks of irrigation canals. With basic tools of stone and wood, they dug artificial channels that guided the river's flow to distant fields. This brilliant innovation transformed nature's unpredictable bounty into a reliable resource, allowing settlements to thrive far beyond the immediate riverbanks. From a modern perspective, the scale of these engineering projects, achieved with rudimentary technology, is truly astonishing. Using only manual labor and simple implements, these ancient engineers graded the land with the precise slope needed to carry water for miles. They built up systems of levees to protect their crops from devastating floods and designed sluice gates to regulate its flow. To keep the entire network from clogging, they even engineered sediment traps to catch the fine silt carried by the river. This complex water management infrastructure required constant vigilance and repair, dredging canals, mending embankments, and clearing blockages, all tasks that demanded organized, collective effort under a unified leadership. The sacred city of Eridu stands as a testament to this transformative age. Founded in the 6th millennium BC, it grew around a temple honoring Enki, the god of water, symbolizing the people's deep reverence for the element that sustained their existence. The layers of archaeology at the site reveal its evolution from a tiny shrine into an expansive complex of buildings and courtyards. Eridu was not merely a settlement. It was the world's first true temple town, a place where religious devotion and civil authority became inextricably linked. Above all else, this period represents humanity's decisive shift away from a nomadic existence of hunting and gathering toward a settled life rooted in agriculture. For millennia, human groups had followed the seasonal migrations of animals and foraged for wild edible plants. Now, people committed to a single place, cultivating domesticated grains through cooperative effort. Irrigated fields produced abundant harvests of barley and emmer wheat, while managed herds of sheep and goats provided a steady supply of meat, milk, and wool. This fundamental change completely redefined humanity's relationship with the natural world. The archaeological record vividly illustrates how this new lifestyle reshaped social structures. Evidence from excavated homes reveals specialized zones dedicated to the important tasks of preparing and storing food. This forward-thinking approach is also evident in the appearance of uniquely shaped clay tokens from this era, which are believed to represent the world's earliest accounting methods for tracking harvests. At the same time, the establishment of shared burial grounds suggests a deepening connection to the land and to each other. A powerful sense of place was forming as generations began to live out their entire lives, from birth to death, in one dedicated location. This era of firsts laid the foundation for a degree of societal intricacy that was entirely new to the human experience. Century by century, these settlements steadily grew in size. A surplus of food allowed the population to boom, which in turn freed up individuals to focus on specialized crafts instead of farming. All of this development set Mesopotamia on an irreversible course toward a truly urban way of life, the next great chapter in the story of Sumer. By the close of the 5th millennium BCE, the agricultural systems pioneered in places like Eridu were yielding incredible returns. Sumer's scattered villages began to coalesce, creating a phenomenon the world had never seen before: true cities. One particular city, destined to be the planet's first-ever metropolis, led this revolutionary charge. The growth of this central hub was astonishingly fast. Around 3200 BC, a population of about 50,000 people, a number once thought impossible, lived within nearly 6 kilometers of walled, densely packed neighborhoods. This wasn't just an overgrown village. It represented a complete paradigm shift in human organization. Its walls, constructed from sun-baked mud brick, provided more than just physical protection from threats. They were powerful symbols separating the order of city life from the untamed chaos of the world beyond. Evidence of intelligent design was visible throughout the city's layout. At its very heart stood the Ina precinct, a sacred space dedicated to the goddess Inanna, which contained an intricate network of temples, courtyards, and processional avenues. Dominating the skyline from atop a massive man-made platform, an early precursor to the ziggurats, was the White Temple, providing a commanding view of the entire urban landscape. Sprawling out from these religious centers were the residential districts, where a maze of narrow, twisting streets created vibrant neighborhoods bustling with life from dawn till dusk. Excavations within the Ina district have unearthed a collection of religious buildings on a scale previously unknown to humanity. One such building, the Stone Cone Temple, earned its title from the thousands of colored stone cones embedded in its walls for decoration, and featured a 3-part design with a central hall flanked by adjacent chambers. Nearby was the Limestone Temple, its construction from imported stone, an incredible extravagance in a region with little native rock, demonstrating the immense wealth poured into these holy sites. Another structure, the Pillar Hall, boasted enormous columns supporting a lofty ceiling, creating a breathtaking internal space designed to inspire reverence. To catch the brilliant Mesopotamian sun, these structures were adorned with glittering clay cone mosaics and polished copper panels. Another focal point of religious power in the city was the Anu Ziggurat complex, a precinct consecrated to Anu, the god of the sky. This incredible artificial mountain rose in a series of terraces, culminating in the White Temple at its summit. Visible for miles across the flat landscape, the shrine's brilliant white-plastered exterior stood out dramatically against the blue sky. Its interior contained a lone room with an altar and offering table, where priestly rites were performed to bridge the gap between the mortal and celestial realms. A great stairway ascending the ziggurat's face was both a literal and metaphorical pathway, a genuine stairway to heaven connecting the world of humans to the domain of the gods. Life within the city walls brought a profound transformation to human interaction. The intimate, know-everyone dynamic of village life vanished. People now lived alongside total strangers, a reality that demanded new forms of social control and structured hierarchies. Evidence for this shift is found in the archaeological record, which reveals a widening gap in the size and complexity of homes, suggesting a society becoming more layered. While many families lived in simple, single-room dwellings, others resided in sprawling, multi-room houses built around private courtyards, marking the emergence of a wealthy elite. The city's residential neighborhoods were a direct reflection of this new, intricate urban social order. A peek into the archaeological record reveals a world of densely packed homes lining narrow, meandering streets, where refuse would accumulate between periodic clearings. Multi-room houses built around open-air central courtyards provided light, ventilation, and a practical space for domestic chores for extended families. A profound connection between the living and their ancestors was maintained by burying deceased family members beneath the floors of many of these homes. Sleeping quarters on the upper stories offered a welcome escape from the ground-level heat, while rooftops became additional living areas during the cool evening hours. The layers of archaeology reveal that homes were rebuilt over generations following the same street plans, indicating the presence of long-established neighborhoods with deep-rooted social bonds. At its core, the operation of these urban centers depended on a degree of specialization and interdependence that was simply unattainable in village settings. Farmers delivered their harvests to city markets, while artisans produced specialized goods. Priests served as the crucial link between the divine and mortal realms as laborers built and maintained public works. This profound division of labor marked a radical break from the self-sufficient agrarian lifestyle that had characterized human society for thousands of years. This urban explosion set off a cascade of innovations that would permanently reshape human potential. None was more significant than the invention of writing, which gave humanity its first tool for recording information beyond the confines of memory. This development was not born from a desire for poetry or philosophy, but from the concrete needs of administration. The earliest clay tablets, which appeared around 3400 BC, contained simple pictographic symbols representing commodities like grain, livestock, or beer. Temple administrators created these early cuneiform records to track the movement of goods into and out of their vast storehouses. In its initial form, each symbol was a simplified drawing of the item it represented, a star-like image for a sheep or a jar shape for beer. These foundational records allowed for an unprecedented degree of accuracy in managing the city's complex economy. The journey from simple pictures to a sophisticated script happened with breathtaking speed. Over just a few hundred years, the pictographic system transformed into a true writing system capable of conveying abstract concepts. Scribes began rotating the symbols 90 degrees and using a reed stylus to press wedge-shaped marks into wet clay. This unique appearance later earned the script the name cuneiform, derived from the Latin cuneus, for wedge. The number of characters was streamlined from nearly 2,000 pictographs to around 600 cuneiform signs, making the system both easier to master and far more expressive. By 3000 BC, scribes had figured out how to represent the phonetic sounds of spoken language, enabling them to write out names, verbs, and grammatical elements, the final step in creating a complete system of writing. What began as a tool for bean counters had blossomed into a complex script that could capture abstract thought and preserve the spoken word. The act of writing itself reshaped human cognition, paving the way for elaborate administrative systems, precise mathematical calculations, and eventually the birth of literature. With writing, knowledge could be accumulated and passed down through generations, liberated from the frailties of human recall. Another invention of equal, world-altering significance was the wheel. Sometime in the late 4th millennium BC, Mesopotamian craftspeople adapted the spinning platforms used for making pottery into true potter's wheels, allowing them to craft vessels with incredible speed and perfect symmetry. Shortly thereafter, this innovation was applied to transportation. Clay models from the period depict four-wheeled carts pulled by draft animals like oxen and onagers, which dramatically increased the volume of goods that could be moved across land. The earliest wheels were heavy, solid discs of wood cut from tree trunks, fastened to axles with leather thongs and wooden pegs. These were soon improved with lighter designs made of joined sections of wood, which reduced weight without sacrificing strength. The later invention of the spoked wheel around 2000 BC would further advance transport, leading to the creation of fast, lightweight chariots that would revolutionize both warfare and communication. The era was also forged in fire, with astounding leaps forward in metallurgy. While earlier cultures had made occasional use of naturally occurring copper, Sumerian metalworkers mastered smelting, the technique of extracting metal from its ore through intense, controlled heat. This breakthrough dramatically increased the supply of copper, fueling a boom in the production of metal tools, weapons, and ornate objects. Burials from this period contain artifacts showing a growing sophistication in metalworking, including the creation of alloys like arsenical copper to produce a harder and more durable final product. The dawn of this metallurgical age was humble, likely beginning when people noticed small beads of workable metal forming in the embers of campfires built over copper-rich rocks. Over time, Sumerian artisans engineered specialized furnaces capable of reaching much higher temperatures, using clay pipes called tyres to channel air and intensify the heat. By the close of the Uruk period, they had perfected casting, pouring molten metal into ceramic molds to mass-produce identical objects. Archaeological excavations have unearthed entire workshops, complete with crucibles, molds, and piles of slag, providing clear evidence of industrial-scale metal production that helped fuel the growth of the cities. These technological breakthroughs were both a cause and an effect of a growing class of specialized artisans. The archaeological record shows evidence of dedicated quarters for potters, metalsmiths, stonemasons, and other skilled professionals. Unlike their village-dwelling ancestors who often juggled multiple roles, these urban specialists dedicated their lives to mastering a single craft, achieving a level of skill and creativity impossible in earlier societies. Keeping such a complex urban machine running required an administrative revolution of its own. The temple complex stood at the heart of Mesopotamian society, functioning not only as a spiritual center, but also as the primary engine of economic life. The Great Ina precinct, for example, housed not just shrines, but also massive storehouses, workshops, and administrative buildings from which the city's wealth was managed. Temple economies operated on a redistributive system. Agricultural surplus was collected at the temple as an offering to the gods, and then doled back out to support the priests, artisans, and laborers who maintained the city's infrastructure. Early cuneiform tablets demonstrate that this entire system was meticulously documented, with detailed records of grain disbursements, ration lists, and work assignments that kept the city functioning. The challenge of managing this flow of resources drove innovation in accounting. Temple officials established standardized systems of rations, with allocations varying by age, sex, and occupation. The archaeological record is filled with thousands of small clay tokens of various shapes, cones, spheres, and discs, which were used as counters for different commodities before being sealed in clay envelopes to create a permanent transaction record. This system of tokens was a direct precursor to numerical notations on clay tablets, which allowed for far more sophisticated bookkeeping. Administrators soon developed intricate methods for tracking assets and liabilities, calculating interest on loans, and even forecasting future yields. With all this complex administration, a whole new and influential social class came into being, the scribes. To master the difficult cuneiform writing system, young men, and occasionally women, underwent years of rigorous training. This education involved memorizing hundreds of distinct signs and learning how to skillfully handle clay tablets. Their specialized knowledge set them apart from the general populace, securing them privileged positions within temple and palace bureaucracies. For the next 3,000 years, the scribal class would remain a fundamental pillar of Mesopotamian civilization. A clearly defined social hierarchy began to emerge during this time. Growing disparities in housing quality, burial practices, and the value of personal possessions are all visible in the archaeological record. Administrative texts reinforce this, listing a variety of titles and professions, from priests and overseers to merchants, artisans, and laborers, that reveal a complex social ladder. Urban life, unlike the more communal nature of earlier villages, presented both pathways to social advancement and the looming threat of exploitation. This period also gives us the first troubling glimpses of institutionalized inequality. Some clay tablets make reference to individuals who can be described as servants or slaves, though the precise nature of their status remains a subject of scholarly debate. What seems clear from certain texts is that major institutions, first the temple and later the palace, controlled a workforce of unfree laborers, putting them to work on large-scale farming and construction projects. This systemic inequality represents the darker side of the otherwise incredible achievements of early Mesopotamian civilization. By the time the 4th millennium BCE drew to a close, the Sumerian experiment with urban living had proven to be a resounding success. The revolutionary ideas first born in southern Mesopotamia rippled out across the region and beyond, setting the stage for the next chapter in its history, the rise of competing city-states that would define the early dynastic period. As the 3rd millennium BCE dawned, Mesopotamia entered a new and turbulent phase. The era of initial urban expansion gave way to one of intense political fragmentation. The fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates were now dotted with numerous rival powers, each centered on a major city and its agricultural hinterlands. Independent hubs like Kish, Lagash, Umma, and Nippur functioned as self-governing states, complete with their own rulers, patron deities, and distinct territorial ambitions. Each of these metropolises was shielded by impressive defensive works, including massive walls to protect citizens from external threats. Their city centers were dominated by grand administrative buildings, temples, and palaces, around which dense residential neighborhoods sprawled. Intricate canal systems crisscrossed these urban landscapes, providing water for daily use while also acting as vital transportation arteries for commerce. The very sophistication of the architecture was a testament to generations of accumulated engineering know-how. A fantastic example of these early dynastic centers is the city of which was famously excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s and 30s. Its formidable double-wall system enclosed an area of nearly 60 hectares, with the outer wall running for more than 4 kilometers. While its enormous ziggurat was largely reconstructed in later periods, it was originally built upon early dynastic foundations. The city's residential zones revealed tightly packed houses lining winding streets, most of which were too narrow for any wheeled vehicles. At the very heart of lay its royal cemetery, where archaeologists unearthed astonishing evidence of elite wealth and ritual practices, including the notorious death pits filled with sacrificed retainers meant to accompany their masters into the afterlife. Further north in Babylonia, the city of Kish enjoyed a special prestige, believed in mythology to be the place where kingship was handed down from the heavens after the Great Flood. Excavations there have uncovered major public structures, most notably a palace known as the Plano-Convex Building, named for the unique shape of its bricks. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text, designates Kish as the seat of the very first dynasty after the flood, highlighting its immense ideological sway in the political thought of the time. The city-state of Lagash, despite its relatively small urban core, grew to become a major political player. It effectively managed a highly productive agricultural territory through a network of 3 primary settlements: Lagash itself, Gursu, and Nina. An extraordinary archive of royal inscriptions from Lagash provides us with an unparalleled window into the political ideology, military campaigns, and administrative strategies of the early dynastic period. These texts vividly describe a long-running border dispute with the neighboring city of Umma, which spiraled into generations of warfare and stands as the most thoroughly documented conflict of its era. A fundamental shift in leadership also occurred during this period, where earlier settlements had largely been governed by temple authorities, priests who acted as intermediaries between humanity and the divine. Power now shifted to secular, military leaders known as lugals, or great men. These figures typically rose to prominence during times of war with neighboring cities, and then worked to cement their authority, eventually establishing hereditary dynasties. These emerging monarchs legitimized their rule by claiming divine sanction. Royal inscriptions frequently declared that the kings had been personally chosen by the city's patron god to act as their representative on earth. This theological basis for their authority was reinforced through elaborate coronation ceremonies. As a very visible demonstration of their power and piety, kings commissioned monumental building projects, particularly new temples and palaces. These structures were designed to inspire awe in subjects and rivals alike, requiring the labor of skilled artisans, the use of expensive imported materials, and the application of new engineering techniques. But despite these claims of divine selection, a king's power was often contested. Powerful noble families, organized into councils, could act as a check on a monarch's authority. Furthermore, local shrines often maintained a degree of autonomy from the central palace administration. This constant tension between centralized royal power and other traditional sources of authority created a dynamic and often unstable political environment within each city-state. The existence of so many independent and ambitious states made conflict almost inevitable, and commemorative artifacts from this period provide an unprecedented visual record of military engagement. Take the Standard of Ur, a hollow wooden box intricately decorated with shell and lapis lazuli. It depicts military processions, brutal chariot combat, and the parading of captured enemies. These detailed images reveal organized military units with standardized equipment and clear tactical formations. This incredible artifact, discovered in a royal tomb at Ur, measures about 20 by 45 centimeters. Its two main panels display contrasting scenes of war and peace, meticulously inlaid with shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli against a dark background. The war side features four-wheeled battle wagons trampling enemies, disciplined infantry armed with spears and axes, and naked prisoners being brought before a large figure, presumably the king. The peace side portrays a royal banquet, with attendants leading animals and carrying fish while musicians perform. These vivid portrayals offer priceless insights into early dynastic military organization, technology, and the ideological connection between warfare and kingship. Yet no single artifact captures the sheer brutality of this early warfare quite like the steel of the vultures. Commissioned around 2450 BCE by King Enatum of Lagash, this limestone monument celebrates a decisive victory over the rival city of Umma. One side of the stele shows the king leading a tight phalanx of soldiers, armed with spears and large shields, as they march over the bodies of their fallen enemies. The other side depicts vultures carrying away the severed heads of the defeated soldiers, a gruesome image that gives the monument its modern name. The text on the stele details the specific territorial disputes between Lagash and Umma over a fertile plain known as the Gedina. These inscriptions describe the god's direct involvement in the war, recounting how Lagash's patron deity, Ningirsu, appeared to Enatum in a dream to promise him victory. After crushing Umma's forces, Enatum imposed severe terms, including heavy tribute payments and the construction of memorial mounds over the mass graves of the enemy. The stele is a masterclass in blending historical narrative with powerful political propaganda. This environment of constant conflict naturally became a crucible for military innovation. The archaeological record paints a clear picture of an arms race, with increasingly sophisticated weaponry emerging over time. Spearheads forged from copper alloys began to replace older, less effective stone versions. To protect their most valuable warriors, armies equipped elite soldiers with helmets and body armor. The era's most significant technological leap was the composite bow, a marvel of engineering crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew. This powerful weapon dramatically outclassed simple wooden bows in both range and penetrating power, and it would stand as the pinnacle of projectile technology until the invention of gunpowder thousands of years later. Evidence from excavations all over Mesopotamia reveals a growing martial sophistication, from the famous copper helmet found at Ur to mace heads that evolved from crude stone balls into ornate symbols of authority. The discovery of standardized spearheads and arrowheads also points to the mass production of military equipment, suggesting that a distinct social class of military specialists was on the rise, rewarded with land or rations for their service. The underlying causes of these wars were often surprisingly mundane: access to fertile farmland and control over precious water rights. The Stele of the Vultures, for example, explicitly mentions a dispute over border fields located along irrigation canals. In a dry region where a city's entire economic and political survival depended on agricultural surplus, these vital resources were certainly worth fighting and dying for. A victory on the battlefield delivered more than just new territory. It also massively boosted the prestige of the triumphant ruler. The economic consequences of warfare also rippled far beyond the initial conquest. Captives seized in battle became a source of labor for vast construction projects and agricultural work. Conquered cities were forced to pay tribute, filling the victor's royal treasuries with valuable materials and luxury goods. This newfound wealth would then be used to finance even more military campaigns, locking the city-states into a perpetual cycle of competition and conquest. Yet life wasn't just about warfare. Paradoxically, this era of intense competition also witnessed a remarkable flowering of culture. Archaeological digs have opened a window into the daily lives of the Sumerian people. We can see a range of homes, from humble one-room dwellings to large, complex compounds built around inner courtyards. The average family lived in a house made of mud brick with a roof of reeds. Inside, meals were prepared over a central hearth, and people slept on woven reed mats. Their diet was built around hearty barley bread, supplemented with pulses, vegetables, and fish. While meat was a rarer treat, beer brewed from barley was a daily staple. Far from being just a drink, it was a central part of the culture, enjoyed at family gatherings and essential to religious ceremonies. Pottery, in all shapes and sizes, was used for everything from cooking and storage to serving food. A closer look at the remains of ancient meals, thanks to modern archaeology, reveals a surprisingly diverse diet. Barley was the absolute cornerstone, used to make both bread and porridge. Sweetness came from fruits like dates, apples, and pomegranates, while garlic, onions, and leeks provided savory flavor. Animal bones tell a story of domesticated sheep, goats, and pigs, alongside fish pulled from the rivers, though meat was likely reserved for the wealthy or for special feasts. Dairy products, including butter and different kinds of cheese, were also a key source of fats and protein. The Sumerians even had different types of beer, ranging from a low-alcohol brew for daily consumption to much stronger versions saved for festivals and sacred rituals. Sumerians also knew how to unwind, and moments of leisure provided a necessary escape from daily toil. The best evidence for this comes from the discovery of the royal game of in a number of elite tombs. The existence of this intricate board game speaks volumes about its importance in their society. It was a two-player race game, played on a beautifully decorated board, often inlaid with shell, precious lapis lazuli, and red limestone. These games were more than just a simple diversion. They were social events and an opportunity to display strategic thinking. The game board itself, dating back to around 2500 BC, has 20 squares arranged in 3 rows. Each player had 7 pieces, which they moved according to the throw of 4-sided dice in a race to get them across and off the board. Certain squares on the board offered a safe haven or an extra turn. Though the original rules were lost, they have been pieced together from a much later Babylonian tablet, revealing a sophisticated game that blended luck and strategy. The discovery of similar game boards across the ancient Near East proves just how popular this pastime was among different cultures and social classes. The position of women in this society presents a complex picture. While the overarching structure was undoubtedly patriarchal, legal documents reveal that women possessed a surprising number of rights. Cuneiform tablets show that women could own their own property, actively participate in business, and even hold influential religious offices. Administrative records, for instance, mention women who owned and operated their own textile workshops, a clear sign of economic independence. Unsurprisingly, women from royal and noble families held the highest status and could wield considerable influence through their powerful family connections. But even outside the elite, legal codes granted women specific rights. Marriage contracts clearly laid out the duties of both husband and wife and the terms for a divorce. Women could inherit and manage their own assets, including land and slaves. Brewing was an industry often run by women, providing a path to economic security. Texts even mention female scribes, suggesting that at least some women from elite families had access to a formal education. And within the religious sphere, women served as priestesses, particularly in the temples dedicated to female deities. So while gender inequality was a fact of life, Sumerian women arguably had more legal and economic power than their counterparts in many later civilizations. This era of innovation wasn't limited to the battlefield or the home. It also extended into the abstract world of mathematics. The Sumerians developed the sexagesimal system, a base 60-numeral system that proved incredibly useful for trade and administration. This mathematical framework allowed for precise calculations of everything from the area of a field to the volume of a granary. Clay tablets from the period show a remarkable aptitude for advanced problem-solving, including methods for finding square and cube roots and even early algebraic equations. While its origins trace back to the Uruk period, this base 60 system was fully developed during this time, offering incredible computational flexibility. Its influence is so profound that we still use it today every time we measure time in 60-second minutes and 60-minute hours, or a circle in 360 degrees, a direct legacy of Sumerian ingenuity. Simultaneously, the foundational Sumerian invention of writing, cuneiform, was reaching its full maturity. It evolved from its early, picture-based form into a sophisticated script using hundreds of distinct wedge-shaped characters. Though it remained a vital tool for economic and administrative records, its use expanded dramatically. Scribes began to compose the first works of literature, record sacred hymns, and carve royal inscriptions to commemorate great deeds. Mastering this complex system required years of dedicated training, giving rise to a specialized class of scribes who acted as the guardians and transmitters of cultural knowledge. Excavated scribal schools, known as ejubas or tablet houses, reveal a highly structured and rigorous education. Students began with the basics, learning how to properly form a clay tablet and hold a reed stylus. They would then practice by endlessly copying lists of signs, eventually moving on to complex vocabulary lists and even bilingual Sumerian-Akkadian dictionaries. The most advanced students would then tackle legal texts, mathematical problems, and classic literary works. Those classic literary works were more than just stories. They were windows into a universe the Mesopotamians believed was completely saturated with divine power. This was a world where every natural phenomenon, social custom, and human choice was understood to unfold within a cosmic drama directed by supernatural beings. An incredible surge of cultural achievement, which flourished in an era of political fragmentation and constant conflict, gives us insight into the creative genius of early dynastic society. The very competition between these independent cities acted as a catalyst for innovation, as each urban center strove to eclipse its neighbors with magnificent buildings, superior artistry, and greater intellectual achievements. Reflecting this worldview was an elaborate pantheon of gods and goddesses who held sway over all aspects of existence. 4 principal gods formed the pinnacle of this celestial hierarchy. The sky god En represented ultimate authority, though he remained largely aloof from the day-to-day lives of mortals. As the god of wind and storms, Enlil served as the energetic enforcer of the divine order, making the crucial decisions that shaped the fate of the cosmos. Wisdom and ingenuity were embodied by Enki, the lord of the freshwater abyss, who frequently intervened to assist humanity in times of need. Finally, Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, presided over the potent and often contradictory forces of love, procreation, and warfare, personifying both creative and destructive energies. Beneath this supreme council existed a host of hundreds of lesser gods, each tasked with supervising a specific domain. Deities like Nana for the moon, Udu for the sun, Ninhursag for the earth, Ninurta for agriculture, and Jibal for fire ensured that every corner of reality had its own divine manager. The result was a cosmos teeming with life, in which every event in the natural world was interpreted as a deliberate act of supernatural will. The Sumerians held that the gods established a foundational cosmic principle known as the Me. These were divine decrees or powers that provided the blueprint for both the physical universe and human society, governing how everything functioned. When humanity correctly adhered to the me, a state of harmony was maintained between the mortal world and the cosmic design. Though it survives in later Akkadian versions, the creation epic known as the Enuma Elish contains cosmological ideas that originate in Sumer. This myth describes a time before the separation of sky and earth when only primordial waters existed. From these waters, successive generations of deities emerged, with the younger gods eventually rising up to defeat the older, more chaotic beings. In a climactic divine battle, the victorious god, in some tellings Marduk, who takes Enlil's place, fashions the known world from the corpse of the vanquished Tiamat, establishing cosmic order out of divine conflict. The story portrays a universe shaped by divine power and struggle, where order was a fragile state that required continuous upkeep through religious observance. Creation stories also serve to define humanity's role within this divine order. One account tells of humans being fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed god, creating a being with both an earthly body and a divine essence. In another version, humans are explicitly created to relieve the gods of their manual labor, serving as a dedicated workforce to build temples, offer sacrifices, and perform the rituals necessary to keep the cosmos functioning. The myth of Atrahasis provides a detailed explanation for this arrangement, telling how the lower-ranking gods went on strike, refusing their duties of digging canals and maintaining the universe. As a solution, Enki and the mother goddess Nintu fashioned humans from clay and the blood of a slain god, designing them to perform the work in service to the divine. This narrative established humanity's primary function, to serve the gods through ritual and productive work. Later in the myth, when humanity's noise began to disturb the gods, they sent a series of disasters to reduce their numbers, thereby introducing mortality as a way to control the human population. These mythological accounts made it clear that humanity's fundamental purpose was to serve the gods by adhering to divine laws and performing proper worship. This relationship was perceived not as one-sided exploitation, but as a crucial cosmic collaboration. By fulfilling their assigned role, humans could secure ongoing divine favor, which would manifest as bountiful harvests, political stability, and protection from natural disasters. The temple stood at the very heart of religious life in Mesopotamia. Every significant settlement featured grand sacred compounds dedicated to its patron deity. Over time, these structures evolved from modest shrines into elaborate multi-room complexes, ultimately developing into the massive, stepped platforms that would become the iconic ziggurats. These holy precincts were considered the literal homes of the gods, where they could dwell among their mortal followers. Daily rituals included the ceremonial washing and clothing of divine statues, the presentation of food and drink, and complex purification rites. A dedicated staff of professional priests and priestesses maintained this constant stream of ritual activity, guaranteeing an uninterrupted divine presence within the city. The daily cycle of temple rituals began before dawn, as priests unsealed the temple doors and performed purification ceremonies. The first offerings of the day, bread, meat, beer, and incense, were presented to the deity's statue, which was viewed as the god's real physical manifestation on earth, not merely a symbol. A second meal was offered at noon, while afternoons were dedicated to the temple's administrative functions, such as managing its vast economic holdings. The day concluded with evening rituals involving more offerings, hymns, and prayers, after which the inner sanctuary was sealed for the night. This perpetual cycle of divine service not only upheld the cosmic order, but also played a key role in the city's economy by redistributing agricultural wealth. The very architecture of the temples was a reflection of the cosmic hierarchy. The innermost sanctuary, which housed the divine statue, was restricted to high-ranking priests. The outer courtyards, however, allowed for broader public participation during festivals and ceremonies. By building temples on raised platforms or artificial mounds, the Sumerians created a symbolic link between the earthly and heavenly realms, enhancing the connection between mortals and the gods. Beyond the official state religion, a vibrant personal faith was practiced within individual households. Archaeological excavations have unearthed small shrines inside private residences, often containing figurines representing protective spirits or revered ancestors. Families engaged in their own domestic rituals to ask for divine safeguarding of their homes. A personal god often served as a vital intermediary, advocating for an individual with the more powerful and distant cosmic deities, particularly in moments of crisis or personal need. This household devotion centered on family gods who acted as personal advocates. Archaeologists have found numerous small clay figurines of these guardian spirits buried under the floors of homes. Families would maintain small altars for daily prayers and offerings. Key life events like birth, marriage, and death were all marked by specific domestic rites meant to ensure divine blessing and protection. In the unpredictable world of Mesopotamia, where famine, flood, or war could strike at any moment, these household practices provided essential spiritual solace. To better navigate this world, practices of divination offered a critical means of communicating with the supernatural. Specially trained experts would interpret signs in the natural world as direct messages from the gods. These omens could be found in the patterns of oil poured on water, the shape of smoke rising from incense, or, most importantly, the features on the livers of sacrificial animals. These techniques enabled people to discern the divine will and adjust their actions to remain aligned with the cosmic order. The most sophisticated of these methods was the inspection of sheep livers, a practice called hepatoscopy. It was founded on the belief that the gods inscribed their intentions onto the organs of sacrificed animals. Diviners would then analyze and interpret anomalies like lesions, discolorations, or the shape of the gallbladder according to complex rules recorded in extensive technical manuals. Other methods were also widely used, including astrology for reading the movements of celestial bodies, lechonomancy for interpreting oil patterns, libanomancy for smoke patterns, and oniromancy for analyzing dreams. Together, these practices constituted a spiritual technology for managing an uncertain future by seeking divine guidance. The year was punctuated by religious festivals, which served as cycles of communal celebration and cosmic renewal. The New Year festival, known as the Akidu, involved a series of intricate ceremonies, including a staged ritual combat, a sacred marriage, and the recitation of creation myths. Through these shared public events, the cosmic order was reaffirmed, and the vital connection between the community and its divine patrons was strengthened. During these sacred moments, participants could feel a tangible connection to the foundational events that had shaped their world. Celebrated at the spring equinox, the Akidu was the most important religious event of the year. Lasting for 12 days, this ceremony included the ritual cleansing of the city's temples, a symbolic humiliation and reinvestment of the king, a public reading of the Enuma Elish creation epic, and a sacred marriage rite, or hierogamy, between the king and a high priestess representing Inanna. For a time, ordinary social hierarchies were inverted, with rituals involving role reversal and a carnival-like atmosphere. The festival climaxed with a grand procession of divine statues through the city, followed by widespread feasting and public celebration. This elaborate cycle of rituals served to regenerate the cosmos, validate royal authority, and fortify the community's social bonds. This deeply religious perspective found its most profound expression in Mesopotamia's literary creations. Professional scribes produced highly sophisticated texts that explored the complex relationship between mortals and the divine. These compositions, preserved on clay tablets, represent the very first literature in human history. One of the most remarkable individuals in this literary tradition is the poet Enheduanna. As the daughter of King Sargon of Akkad and the high priestess of the moon god in Ur, she composed powerful hymns to the goddess Inanna around 2300 BC. Critically, she signed her work, making her the first author in all of history known to us by name. In poetry of astonishing emotional intensity, she explored the nature of divine power and human vulnerability, establishing literary conventions that would influence writers for generations. Enheduanna's most famous composition, The exaltation of Inanna, Ninmishara, recounts her personal suffering during a political rebellion and her desperate appeal to the goddess for salvation. The work is a masterclass in literary composition, weaving together autobiography, political commentary, and profound religious faith. Her collection of temple hymns provides a systematic survey of 42 different holy sites throughout Mesopotamia, creating a kind of sacred map in poetic form. Enheduanna's writing demonstrates an exceptional poetic craft, with a brilliant command of metaphor, parallelism, and repetition. Her distinct literary voice, at once personal, passionate, and politically engaged, secures her position as the foundational figure in world literature. The most renowned literary work to emerge from this world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, grappled with the universal questions of mortality and meaning. While the definitive version was compiled much later, its origins lie in a collection of Sumerian tales about a historical king of Uruk. The epic follows its hero's journey from an arrogant tyrant to a grieving, wise man, which centers on his futile quest for immortality. This literary masterpiece explored the core human paradox, the tension between our capacity for great achievement and the inevitability of death. The epic recounts the story of the part-divine King Gilgamesh, whose oppressive rule leads the gods to create Enkidu, a wild man of equal strength, to challenge him. Following an initial clash, the two form a deep bond and embark on heroic adventures. But when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is shattered by grief and the terrifying realization of his own mortality. He sets off on a journey to the edge of the world to find Utnapishtim, the only mortal to survive the Great Flood and be granted eternal life. Although he finds the flood hero and even briefly obtains a plant that restores youth, Gilgamesh ultimately fails to gain immortality. He returns to his city, Uruk, having accepted his mortal fate, but now finding solace and meaning in the enduring legacy of his city's walls, the achievements of civilization itself. This kind of cultural inheritance was also preserved in a rich body of religious poetry. Temple hymns were crafted to celebrate the attributes of deities and sanctify their holy places. In stark contrast, lamentations voiced collective grief over the destruction of cities, interpreting these calamities as the consequence of divine abandonment. Mythological narratives chronicled the adventures and disputes of the gods, providing explanations for the origins of the world and its customs. The story of Inanna's descent into the underworld stands as a powerful example of the sophistication of Sumerian mythology. In this riveting narrative, the goddess journeys to the realm of her sister, Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead. To enter, Inanna must pass through 7 gates, surrendering an item of her divine regalia at each one, until she arrives before her sister completely naked and powerless. After Ereshkigal kills her and hangs her corpse on a hook, Inanna's revival is only achieved through the cunning of her faithful attendant, Ninshubur, who rallies the other gods to help. Her release, however, comes with a catch. She must provide a substitute to take her place in the land of the dead. Tragically, she chooses her own husband, Damuzi, whom she finds celebrating in her absence. This complex myth explores profound themes of divine power, cosmic boundaries, sacrifice, and rebirth, all articulated through vivid imagery and remarkable psychological depth. These literary achievements were not simply works of art, they were viewed as active tools for maintaining the cosmic order. The ceremonial performance of myths during religious festivals was thought to reenact and therefore magically renew the foundational events they described. Lamentations were a form of spiritual technology, performed to appease angry gods and win back their favor. Hymns were chanted during temple rites to summon and engage the power of a deity. Literature, in this sense, was a vital component in the ongoing dialogue between the human and supernatural worlds. The literary tradition of Mesopotamia was instrumental in preserving religious doctrine, historical memory, and cultural values for future generations. These ancient texts provide us with an unparalleled view into the minds of the world's first urban society, revealing how they saw themselves and their place in the grand scheme of the universe. It is through their words that we can begin to explore the spiritual and intellectual landscape of early humanity. Out of this world of competing city-states and complex belief systems, a single, transformative figure emerged, an individual poised to completely reshape Mesopotamia's political landscape. This charismatic leader, rising from obscure origins, would go on to forge the very first empire known to history. The dramatic tale of his birth provided the perfect prelude to his extraordinary achievements. According to legend, he was an infant of low birth set adrift on the Euphrates River in a reed basket, a story that would echo for thousands of years in similar myths about great men rescued from obscurity. A royal gardener supposedly found and raised him, allowing him to ascend society's ranks until he became the cupbearer to the king of Kish, a role that gave him an intimate view of how power operated. A first-person text recounts Sargon's legendary birth. "My mother was a high priestess. I knew not my father, my mother conceived me. In secret she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river." This origin story established divine sanction as the foundation for his incredible rise. Whether true or a masterful piece of propaganda, the tale gave a man without royal blood the legitimacy he needed to rule, creating a powerful template for future leaders who seized power. From this prime position at court, the ambitious young man took the name Sargon, meaning legitimate king, and orchestrated a triumphant coup against the king he served. Once in control of Kish, he unleashed his formidable military talents against the rest of the Sumerian city-states. His highly disciplined army brought the great urban centers to their knees, one by one. Even the great city of Uruk, with its legendary defensive walls, was unable to withstand his innovative siege tactics. Sargon's military campaigns, celebrated in both contemporary inscriptions and later literature, were organized with incredible efficiency on a scale never seen before. His army was said to be composed of 5,400 men who ate bread daily before him, a detail that implies he maintained a standing, professional army rather than relying on the citizen militias common at the time. This military innovation gave him a decisive edge over his rivals, whose forces were often assembled only for seasonal conflicts. The capture of Lugal-Zaydsi, the king of Uruk who had previously unified southern Mesopotamia, marked a crucial turning point. Sargon inflicted a calculated public humiliation on his defeated rival, parading him in a neck stock to the gates of the temple of Enlil in the holy city of Nippur. This powerful act served as a symbolic announcement that the god's favor had decisively shifted to him. In just one generation, Sargon's dominion expanded far beyond the traditional borders of Sumer. His conquering armies stormed through the Tigris-Euphrates valley, pushed into Anatolia via the Syrian plateau, and may have even reached the Mediterranean Sea. Administrative texts suggest his influence stretched into modern-day Iran and possibly further, creating a massive territorial state that encompassed a multitude of different landscapes and ethnic populations. Royal inscriptions proudly declared that Sargon ruled the lands from the Upper Sea to the Lower Sea, a claim of control from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed a strong Akkadian presence across northern Mesopotamia, where strategically placed administrative centers were established. The empire's trade network secured a steady flow of precious resources, such as cedar from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Governing such a vast territory demanded new methods for long-distance communication and control, leading to the creation of standardized weights and measures, official road networks, and a class of provincial administrators loyal to the capital. Perhaps Sargon's most brilliant innovation was converting battlefield victories into lasting political control. He installed loyal followers as governors and required their sons to be educated at his court, thereby forging deep administrative bonds that tied far-flung provinces to his central authority. This system of imperial governance would become the model for countless empires to come. The unprecedented scale of the new empire demanded entirely new administrative tools to function. The old methods of governance, which were designed for individual city-states, were completely inadequate for managing a territory spanning diverse ecosystems and language groups. To solve this, imperial bureaucrats instituted standardized accounting procedures and uniform weights and measures, which helped synchronize economic activity over vast distances. A system of consistent bureaucratic protocols made communication between the capital and its provincial outposts more efficient, while royal inspectors roamed the land to ensure that imperial decrees were being enforced. These administrative innovations were the key to overcoming the immense challenges of distance and diversity that had always limited the size of earlier kingdoms. The triumph of Akkadian standardization is clearest in the weights and measures found throughout their former territories. Standardized weight stones, marked with imperial seals and inscriptions, ensured that commercial transactions followed a single, reliable standard, replacing a patchwork of local customs. For tax collection, royal officials used standard measures for volume, which eliminated regional discrepancies that might have created unfair burdens on certain provinces. Standardized units of distance also aided in the planning of large-scale construction projects and in coordinating communication across the empire's sprawling road system. These practical innovations worked together to forge the world's first truly integrated economic zone. Under imperial protection, trade routes prospered like never before. Merchants operated with a new sense of security, benefiting from standardized laws and guarded travel corridors. Commercial networks now extended to the Indus Valley, the Persian Gulf, Anatolia, and possibly as far as Egypt. A tide of exotic goods, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, copper from Oman, and gold from Anatolia, flowed into the heart of the empire, fueling spectacular achievements in art and architecture. The proof of this commercial boom lies in distinctive Akkadian cylinder seals unearthed across the Near East and beyond. Inscriptions boast that ships from Meluha, the Indus Valley, Magan, Oman, and Dilmun, Bahrain, regularly docked in Akkad's harbors. Furthermore, analysis of metal artifacts reveals an increasing use of tin bronze, an alloy that required tin imported from distant sources in Afghanistan or Central Asia. This long-distance commerce not only generated immense wealth for the state through taxes, but also supplied the materials for the grand monuments and luxury goods that broadcast the king's power. The empire's multilingual character also necessitated a clever cultural strategy. While the ruling class spoke Akkadian, a Semitic language distinct from Sumerian, the imperial administration consciously preserved the high status of older Sumerian traditions. In scribal schools, students continued to learn Sumerian alongside Akkadian. Crucially, religious centers received imperial patronage regardless of their local language. This policy of cultural pluralism was a masterful stroke, as it allowed diverse populations to maintain their own identities while participating in the broader imperial structure. Akkadian art from this period reached a new peak of realism and dynamism. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, depicts the king ascending a mountain, stepping over the bodies of his enemies while wearing a horned crown, a symbol previously reserved only for deities. This powerful imagery offers a visual manifesto for an imperial ideology that was elevating monarchs to a semi-divine status. The era's cylinder seals also display extraordinary craftsmanship, with incredibly detailed carvings of mythological stories and epic battle scenes. This artistic flourishing was a direct reflection of the cosmopolitan energy of the imperial cities, where diverse cultural currents converged. But for all its creative energy, this grand imperial experiment was built on a surprisingly fragile foundation. A system so vast demanded constant military vigilance, a necessity that diverted precious resources from more constructive pursuits. This central authority, with its relentless demands for tribute, inevitably stirred resentment among provincial elites. Uprisings would periodically flare up, requiring costly military campaigns to suppress and further straining the imperial structure. These internal fractures represented a persistent challenge for the administrators in the capital. These growing tensions came to a head during the reign of Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin. While he celebrated his military prowess in magnificent monuments, inscriptions from his time tell a story of escalating rebellions that required his direct intervention. The infamous Great Revolt involved a powerful coalition of cities rising up in defiance, a challenge that nearly shattered the empire before Naram-Sin crushed it with overwhelming force. Such conflicts, however, bled the empire of its resources, and undermined the very economic unity that had made it so wealthy. Administrative tablets from the latter half of his reign show increasing demands for both tribute and labor, suggesting a hidden economic desperation behind the facade of imperial power. As if these political troubles weren't enough, they coincided with a calamitous change in the climate. Around 2200 BC, the region was struck by what climatologists call the 4.2 kiloyear event, a devastating drought that lasted for several decades. The proof of this environmental shock is written in the earth itself. Sediment cores drilled from the Persian Gulf and pollen analysis from ancient lakes reveal a dramatic decrease in rainfall. For a civilization entirely dependent on irrigation agriculture, the consequences were disastrous. This was no local dry spell. Modern science shows this drought affected lands from the Aegean all the way to the Indus Valley, triggering the collapse of multiple civilizations at once. Deep-sea cores from the Gulf of Oman show a spike in atmospheric dust, a telltale sign of widespread aridification, while archaeological surveys in northern Mesopotamia confirm that over 75% of settlements were abandoned as people fled the parched farmlands for the river valleys. The agricultural techniques that had sustained the population for generations simply failed in these new, unforgiving conditions. The worsening drought triggered widespread crop failures across the empire, and the great canal networks, starved of water, fell into disuse. Food shortages led to population decline in the once thriving cities, and the resulting collapse in tax revenue crippled the state's ability to fund its army and administration. This climate disaster exposed and intensified every pre-existing weakness in the imperial system. A powerful literary work, The Curse of Akkad, captures the cultural memory of this ecological and political catastrophe. It laments that the great agricultural tracts produced no grain, the large fields and orchards produced no fruit, no new plants grew. While the text attributes the disaster to divine anger over Naram-Sin's sacrilege, it offers a hauntingly accurate depiction of the environmental collapse that helped bring the empire to its knees. This perfect storm of internal rebellion and agricultural collapse made the empire an irresistible target for outside forces. From the northeastern Zagros Mountains, tribes known as the Gutians began launching raids into imperial territory. What started as border skirmishes soon became a full-blown invasion, as the Gutian warriors encountered an imperial army weakened by internal division and famine. Mesopotamian records paint a fearsome picture of the Gutians, calling them an uncivilized people who know no inhibitions, and describing them as having human intelligence but canine instincts. They expertly exploited the empire's vulnerability, striking poorly defended towns and severing what remained of its communication lines. Unlike past enemies who were held at the frontiers, these mountain fighters penetrated deep into the Mesopotamian heartland, presenting an impossible choice for a government already struggling to maintain internal order. By about 2190 BC, these mountain invaders had overrun the imperial capital. The sophisticated political machine, built over generations, disintegrated with shocking speed, leaving individual cities isolated and exposed. The brilliant but brief age of empire dissolved back into a fractured landscape of local rulers, with Gutian warlords now dominating the former imperial core. Their arrival marked a profound disruption to Mesopotamian life, as these semi-nomadic highlanders had no concept of urban administration. A later Sumerian king list dismissively states they ruled with no understanding of order, governing from tents rather than palaces. The literary text, Lamentation over the destruction of Sumer and Ur, refers to them as dragons of the mountain, a people who know no submission. These accounts, while shaped by later propaganda, reflect the genuine sense of cultural shock felt during this chaotic time. The consequences were immediate and severe. Long-distance trade networks disintegrated, a fact confirmed by archaeological finds showing a near-total disappearance of imported luxuries like lapis lazuli and tin. Urban centers withered as citizens fled to the countryside to escape the chaos. The grand construction projects ceased entirely. In place of the intricate web that had connected the imperial age, society reverted to localized strategies of self-sufficient survival. The archaeological layers from this period reveal a clear picture of urban decay. Public buildings fell into ruin, debris clogged the streets, and residential areas shrank as houses were abandoned. Standardized imperial pottery was replaced by distinct local styles, a clear signal of economic fragmentation. Yet, even as the political structure crumbled, the core of the culture endured, sheltered within its most ancient institutions. Temples continued to perform their sacred rites, and scribal schools, though diminished, kept the flame of knowledge alive by preserving literary traditions. Local leaders adapted, forging smaller-scale governments suited to the new reality. Evidence from Nippur, one of Mesopotamia's holiest cities, shows that even in the midst of turmoil, ritual offerings at the Temple of Inanna continued uninterrupted, and scribes meticulously copied older works. These deeply rooted institutions, sustained by faith and community, proved far more resilient than the military-backed empire. From this period of decline, green shoots of recovery began to appear in several southern cities, where local dynasties started to reassert their independence from the Gutian overlords. The archaeological record shows a gradual rebuilding of city infrastructure, the slow repair of irrigation canals, and the revival of local crafts. It was from these pockets of resistance, particularly in the ancient religious center of Uruk, that military leaders emerged, determined to expel the foreign occupiers and spark a Mesopotamian Renaissance. Their efforts would set the stage for the remarkable rebirth of the Neo-Sumerian period. The most successful of these resistance movements was organized by Udu-Hegel of Uruk, who united a coalition of southern cities weary of Gutian rule. In a victory inscription that frames the conflict as a holy war, he documents his triumphant campaign against the Gutian king Sargon, a victory that would herald a new dawn for Sumer. That triumphant victory was immediately framed as an act of divine will. Inscriptions describe how Udu-Hegel's prayers to the gods Inanna and Dumuzi were answered with a divinely granted victory, casting him as the sacred defender of civilization against the barbarian mountain dwellers. This exact political concept of a native king chosen by the gods to restore cosmic harmony would become the ideological cornerstone of the subsequent Neo-Sumerian age. While Udu-Hegel of Uruk initiated the liberation from Gutian rule with his decisive battle, his moment of glory was fleeting. Power soon transitioned to his former governor of a determined and ambitious leader named Ur-Nammu, who would go on to found the dynasty that oversaw this incredible revival of culture and civilization. Ur-Nammu's military campaigns systematically brought the old imperial territories back into the fold, re-establishing centralized authority over Sumer and Akkad city by city. His conquests, however, were ideologically distinct from earlier expansions. He portrayed himself not as a foreign aggressor, but as the great restorer of Mesopotamian tradition, grounding his authority in a shared cultural heritage. The king's royal inscriptions emphasize his role in winning back divine favor after the Gutian period of chaos. One text declares that he established freedom for the peoples of Sumer and Akkad by driving out the foreign oppressors. Another celebrates his efforts to restart international trade, boasting, "The roads that had been blocked up, I cleared for traffic. I removed the tolls." Archaeological evidence supports this narrative, showing a massive spike in construction projects throughout southern Mesopotamia. Long-neglected irrigation, networks, and public buildings were rehabilitated in a rebuilding campaign that included both vital infrastructure and symbolic monuments designed to legitimize the new dynasty. No structure better captured the spirit of this restoration than the great ziggurat of Soaring more than 30 meters above the plain, this colossal stepped platform was a breathtaking marriage of advanced engineering and ancient religious symbolism. Built from millions of mud bricks and sheathed in a protective outer layer of baked bricks mortared with bitumen, its sheer scale was a testament to the renewed power of Mesopotamian civilization. This ziggurat would set the architectural standard for sacred structures across the region for centuries to come. The undertaking required a staggering mobilization of labor and resources. Its core alone is thought to contain 720,000 baked bricks, each weighing about 15 kilograms, with millions more sun-dried bricks making up the interior. Cleverly engineered drainage channels were designed to protect the massive edifice from water damage by diverting rainfall. 3 grand staircases converged on the first level, where a single central flight continued upward to the temple that once crowned its peak. This marvel of architecture was a tangible declaration of the new dynasty's political power, economic strength, and religious authority. However, Ur-Nammu's most enduring legacy was in the field of law. His famous law code, which precedes Hammurabi's more celebrated collection by 3 centuries, established consistent legal principles across his entire kingdom. The surviving sections cover subjects from family law to commercial regulations, and they detail scaled penalties that matched the severity of the crime. This systematic approach to justice represented a monumental leap in the practice of governance, creating a stable balance between centralized authority and predictable legal processes. The Code of Ur-Nammu opens with a prologue asserting that the king's right to legislate is a divine gift. The laws themselves are presented in a conditional format. If a man does X, then Y will be the consequence. They address homicide, sexual assault, perjury, agriculture, and slavery. In a significant divergence from later Babylonian law, which often prescribed death or dismemberment, Ur-Nammu's code primarily mandated monetary fines as restitution for injuries. This preference for rest laid the groundwork for an even greater era of stability under Ur-Nammu's son, Shulgi. His ascent to the throne initiated an extraordinary 48-year rule that would become the very definition of effective governance and cultural flourishing. Shulgi uniquely combined a warrior's prowess with a genius for organization, putting in place governmental structures far more advanced than anything that had come before. To manage his domain, the empire was sectioned off into administrative provinces, with each one managed by officials who reported directly back to the throne. Across the realm, standardized methods for keeping records ensured that taxation was fair and resources were distributed evenly. A network of royal messengers traveled swiftly along a purpose-built highway system connecting the kingdom's primary cities. Perhaps most impressive was the intricate redistributive economy he created, which channeled agricultural abundance from the most fertile lands to administrative centers, which in turn sent them to regions requiring specialized goods or support. A testament to this administrative expertise is the incredible archive unearthed at Umma, a provincial capital. Within it, thousands of clay tablets provide a stunningly detailed picture of the state's operations, cataloging everything from grain shipments and work assignments to livestock counts and tax payments. State officials would categorize farmland according to its potential yield, calculating expected harvests through systematic formulas to determine fair tax burdens. Labor teams received highly specific tasks complete with daily output quotas. Couriers traveled along designated pathways according to strict timetables to deliver both official communications and physical supplies. This wealth of documentation reveals a government that operated with mathematical precision to manage a diverse economic landscape. Taxes were levied with exacting accuracy, as royal agents used standard formulas to assess fields, project their output, and assign the appropriate duties. The state's labor requirements for public works were similarly calculated down to the last detail, with specific numbers for work crews and deadlines. At the heart of this Neo-Sumerian bureaucracy was its most sophisticated element, the Bala tax system. Under this model, every province had a rotating obligation to provide for the central government for a specific portion of the year. Their contributions, which were based on meticulously calculated quotas, included everything from farm goods and crafted products to labor for state projects. To ensure everything ran smoothly, provincial governors maintained scrupulous records of their obligations, which were then audited by royal inspectors to prevent any corruption. This ingenious arrangement distributed the economic burden equitably across the empire and also guaranteed a constant flow of resources to the state's core institutions, protecting them from the ups and downs of agricultural seasons. The sheer mathematical complexity and organizational brilliance of this system was a leap forward in the history of human governance. Shulgi's ambitions extended far beyond practical administration. He also ignited a renaissance in literature and scholarship. The king was famously proud of his own literacy in both the Sumerian and Akkadian languages, and even wrote hymns to glorify his accomplishments. Royal patrona provided the funds to collect and safeguard ancient texts while also commissioning brand new literary works. It was during his reign that the Sumerian literary canon was standardized, a crucial step that preserved masterpieces that might otherwise have vanished. Official royal messaging presented Shulgi as the ideal monarch, a formidable warrior, a deep thinker, a supreme athlete, and a direct link to the gods. Hymns of self-adulation, most likely penned by court poets but attributed to the king, recount his superhuman achievements. One such hymn declares his expertise. I am a knowledgeable scribe of Nisaba, goddess of writing. I know the ancestral language, Sumerian. I can resolve difficult arithmetical problems. In another, he is said to have run from the city of Nippur to Ur, a journey of roughly 160 kilometers and back in a single day just to officiate religious festivals in both locations. These carefully crafted narratives cemented a royal ideology that emphasized the king's divine favor and extraordinary talents, all while promoting the cultural values of literacy, physical excellence, and religious devotion. Education became a cornerstone of Shulgi's government. A formal system of schools known as the Ajuba, or tablet houses, was established to prepare the next generation of scribes through a rigorous curriculum. A student's journey began with the rote memorization of cuneiform signs before progressing to more and more complex writing exercises. The most advanced pupils would go on to study mathematics, the specialized language of law, and the art of literary composition. This educational pipeline was designed to generate the highly skilled administrators needed to operate the state's intricate bureaucracy, while simultaneously passing down important cultural traditions. We have physical evidence of this training in the form of discovered exercise tablets, which show student attempts at sign lists, sample legal contracts, multiplication tables, and literary texts with corrections. Excavations of schoolhouses have revealed layouts with benches for pupils and raised platforms for instructors. Surviving texts describing school life paint a picture of an environment with strict discipline, where mistakes or misbehavior could result in corporal punishment. The curriculum masterfully combined the practical skills needed for administration with ideological instruction, ensuring graduates were not only technically proficient, but also fully aligned with the state's values. This educational machine was responsible for creating the countless administrators, accountants, and clerks who kept the Neo-Sumerian state running and safeguarded its literary and religious legacy. The widespread stability and prosperity of the Neo-Sumerian period would become the engine for remarkable advancements across many different fields. This intellectual energy sparked an explosion of progress in fields that touched every aspect of life. The healers of this age, for instance, were working with an astonishing level of insight. They recognized a clear line between illnesses caused by physical factors and those they attributed to divine or demonic forces, creating separate treatment plans for each. Complex pharmaceutical remedies were mixed from a catalog of plant, animal, and mineral sources, each recipe tailored for a particular sickness. Cuneiform tablets served as medical textbooks, systematically categorizing diseases based on their symptoms and the part of the body they afflicted. These guides offered everything from precise instructions for preparing herbal medicines to detailed descriptions of surgical procedures and the necessary ritual incantations for spiritual ailments. The very idea of creating diagnostic handbooks, texts that analyzed symptom patterns to predict the course of a disease, was born here. This blend of careful observation and structured theory created a powerful empirical tradition that would echo for thousands of years, forming a direct line of influence to later Mesopotamian and even ancient Greek medical practices. Meanwhile, it's hard to overstate the importance of beer in the Neo-Sumerian world, and their brewing skills were exceptionally advanced for the time. This beverage was far more than a simple drink. It was a fundamental part of the diet, a key element in religious ceremonies, and a liquid form of currency. We know from both recovered artifacts and official records that they produced over 20 distinct types of beer. Palace and temple breweries, run by trained professionals with specialized equipment, churned out brews of varying strengths, flavors, and textures. Their standardized recipes, with precise barley-to-water ratios and controlled fermentation times, reveal an incredible practical grasp of biology, long before the science of fermentation was ever formally understood. Massive quantities of beer were given to laborers as wages, providing essential calories and hydration. At the same time, specific recipes were required as offerings for particular gods during religious festivals. This industry was so massive that in some regions, brewing consumed an estimated one-third of the entire barley harvest, representing a truly enormous commitment of agricultural wealth. Looking to the heavens, Neo-Sumerian scholars achieved a new level of precision in their astronomical work. By methodically recording everything they saw, they began to recognize the predictable cycles of the cosmos, from the phases of the moon to the wandering paths of the planets. This knowledge was profoundly useful. It allowed them to create highly accurate calendars that harmonized the lunar and solar years, which in turn helped regulate the agricultural cycle and schedule religious festivals. But for the Sumerians, the sky was also a divine message board, and celestial events were interpreted as omens from the gods. To keep their lunar calendar in sync with the seasons, they developed a sophisticated system of intercalation, adding an extra month 7 times within a 19-year period. Generations of scribes maintained meticulous astronomical diaries, logging planetary movements, eclipses, and other phenomena. They also created star catalogs that grouped stars into constellations, many of which would eventually be passed down to the Greeks. This tireless, systematic observation built the essential data sets that would become the bedrock of mathematical astronomy in later Babylonian and Hellenistic cultures, effectively kickstarting the entire tradition of Western astronomy. This flourishing of science and administration was fueled by a truly unprecedented commitment to organizing and preserving information. Across the empire, temple and palace archives swelled with thousands upon thousands of clay tablets. These weren't just random piles, they were structured libraries. We've found tablets covering every imaginable subject, from managing herds of sheep to interpreting divine omens in the sky. Famous collections like the Ura=Hubulu lexical lists served as encyclopedic reference works, standardizing terminology for countless crafts and bureaucratic tasks. The Great Royal Library at Nippur, for instance, housed its vast collection in labeled containers, sorted by subject, with scribes developing cataloging systems to make finding information quick and easy. Court scholars were tasked with compiling definitive works on everything from mathematics to lexicography. This systematic approach to knowledge management was revolutionary. It ensured that accumulated wisdom could be reliably transmitted across generations, a critical task given the fragile nature of clay tablets. The sheer institutional effort involved shows just how much they valued knowledge, seeing it not only as a practical tool for running an empire, but as a precious cultural inheritance. This same intellectual rigor wasn't just confined to the library or the observatory. It was the engine of a remarkably sophisticated economy. The implementation of standardized weights and measures across the land did more than just simplify trade. It demonstrated a deep, practical application of mathematical concepts. Silver became the universal standard of value, allowing for complex transactions involving all kinds of products and services. Surviving contract tablets reveal a world of complex legal and economic arrangements. We see detailed terms for interest-bearing loans that were used to generate capital, business partnerships with clear profit-sharing agreements, and even forward contracts that helped farmers manage the financial risks of agriculture. Merchants organized long-distance trade expeditions, funded by groups of investors. When disputes arose, they were settled in specialized commercial courts that operated according to established mercantile law. This entire framework, with its integrated markets, standardized exchange rates, and credit instruments, created a vibrant and interconnected economic zone, fostering prosperity across the empire. But this incredible economic engine, which generated the wealth for a cultural golden age, ironically contained the blueprint for its own destruction. Deep within the Neo-Sumerian state's complex administrative machinery lay a fatal weakness. While the centralized bureaucracy was incredibly efficient at gathering resources, it squeezed agricultural communities to their breaking point. The crushing burden of taxes and labor requirements left the countryside dangerously vulnerable to any environmental disturbance. We can see from archaeological discoveries that intensive irrigation was causing a slow but steady increase in the salinization of farmland, which began to chip away at productivity despite the empire's advanced farming techniques. Soil sample analysis from southern Mesopotamia reveals a progressive accumulation of salt during the last centuries of the 3rd millennium BC. The very canal systems that turned a dry landscape into a breadbasket were also gradually raising the water table. This process pulled dissolved minerals toward the surface, where the sun's heat evaporated the water and left a toxic concentration of salt behind. As salt levels rose beyond what wheat and barley could tolerate, crop yields plummeted. Farmers fought back by switching to more salt-tolerant barley varieties or leaving the worst fields unplanted, but they were fighting a desperate, losing battle against an ever-worsening environmental crisis. The sustainability problems that doomed late Sumerian civilization were a chilling preview of challenges that countless future agricultural societies would face. These mounting internal problems coincided with a surge of pressure from external enemies. From the eastern highlands, the Elamites, who were long-standing rivals of Mesopotamian powers, began launching increasingly audacious attacks on the empire's border regions. Simultaneously, Amorite pastoralists from Syria started migrating into Sumerian farmland, initially arriving as seasonal workers before establishing their own permanent settlements. This combination of threats stretched the empire's military completely thin. Administrative tablets from the final years of Ibbi-Sin, the last king of Ur's third dynasty, paint a grim picture of an empire struggling to hold its frontiers. We read reports from provincial governors who were unable to repel Amorite raids, pleading for reinforcements that the capital could no longer provide. As security collapsed, communication between Ur and its provinces became dangerously unreliable. Surviving letters tell of crucial grain shipments being ambushed by hostile forces, making it impossible to feed the cities. These logistical nightmares systematically dismantled the centralized economic network that had been the very foundation of Neo-Sumerian power. The empire's final, catastrophic end arrived in 2004 BC, when Elamite forces conquered and sacked the capital city of Ur. Cuneiform tablets paint a horrific scene of the devastation, describing how temples were desecrated, city walls were demolished, and the population was carried away into slavery. A remarkable poem known as the Lament for Ur gives voice to this tragedy, imagining the city's divine protector abandoning her home like a panicked bird fleeing a shattered nest. This text powerfully illustrates the profound psychological shockwave that a political collapse sent through a society that believed its worldly order was a direct reflection of divine harmony. The lament recounts Ur's demise in grisly detail. In its boulevards, where the feast days were celebrated, dead bodies are lying about. In its avenues, where the dances were held, they are viciously attacked. More than just grieving the physical ruin, this poetic work explained the disaster in theological terms, as an act of cosmic abandonment. Nana, the moon god, has abandoned his city. Its people are as if they had never lived there. It's a perfect example of the Mesopotamian mindset, which saw political catastrophe as evidence of a rupture in the cosmic order that could only be healed through ritual mourning to regain the god's favor. The destruction of Ur marked the definitive end of the Sumerians' political dominance. While many of their cities endured, often with substantial populations, they were no longer independent centers of authority. Power instead migrated northward to new dynasties founded by the Amorites, who established new capitals in cities like Isin, Larsa, and most famously, Babylon. These new kings embraced many of Mesopotamia's cultural traditions, while also introducing fresh elements from their own heritage. The most telling evidence of this transition is found in language. Akkadian increasingly replaced Sumerian as the language of everyday life, whereas Sumerian had been the language of government and religion for centuries. By roughly 1800 BC, Sumerian had become a classical language of scholars and priests, much like Latin would be in medieval Europe. This linguistic evolution mirrored a wider cultural transformation, as Amorite communities integrated into Mesopotamian society and contributed their own perspectives. Clues from personal names, letters, and legal texts reveal that this language shift accelerated dramatically after Ur fell. Even as official documents clung to Sumerian terms, daily conversation shifted to Akkadian and Amorite dialects. It was a bilingual era, with inscriptions showing that rulers were often fluent in several languages. Scribal schools adapted by teaching Sumerian as a classical subject alongside the spoken language of Akkadian, a solution that preserved ancient culture while serving modern communication needs. Political control now rested firmly with Amorite dynasties. These new kings masterfully walked a political tightrope, legitimizing their power by adopting the traditional ideology of Mesopotamian royalty while carefully maintaining their distinct tribal identities. The most famous and successful of these new leaders, Hammurabi of Babylon, would ultimately reunite much of the old Sumerian heartland under his northern rule. His celebrated legal code, for instance, was written in Akkadian but drew heavily on earlier Sumerian laws. This Amorite strategy for success involved a savvy blend of old and new. They adopted Mesopotamian royal imagery while emphasizing their own patriarchal lineage, and they supported established local temples while introducing new West Semitic gods into the divine pantheon. This cultural fusion secured their legitimacy with both the traditional urban elites and the tribal groups who cherished their Amorite identity, allowing them to restore political stability to a land ravaged by chaos. Out of this period of political upheaval, an extraordinary degree of cultural continuity managed to persist. Inside the temples, ancient religious practices continued without interruption. The scribal schools made sure that Sumerian literary traditions were carefully preserved and taught to new generations, right alongside more recent works in Akkadian. The vast body of mathematical, astronomical, and medical knowledge developed in earlier eras remained in active use. Because of this powerful cultural resilience, the accomplishments of Sumer would continue to shape the course of later Near Eastern civilizations, long after the Sumerians themselves lost political control. We can see tangible proof of this cultural endurance in archaeological finds at places like Nippur. Temple complexes kept their traditional architectural forms and ritual practices, even as political leadership changed hands. Texts continued to be produced by scribal schools in traditional formats, though the subject matter was updated to feature more Akkadian compositions. We can even see in administrative and legal documents how Sumerian institutional methods were skillfully adapted to fit new political realities. A new synthesis was born from the integration of Amorite traditions into this long-standing cultural framework, one that both honored Sumerian innovations and created space for new ideas. This process ensured the world's first urban civilization survived not as a forgotten relic, but as a dynamic tradition that was always evolving to meet new challenges. Our world today is still profoundly shaped by the ways ancient Sumer's technological breakthroughs remade human capabilities. Their writing system, for instance, which began as a simple tool for accounting, blossomed into a wonderfully versatile instrument for documenting everything from poetry to astronomical data. This information revolution swept across the Near East, inspiring a family of derivative scripts that included the alphabetic systems, which are the direct ancestors of most modern writing. Cuneiform's influence on later scripts was immense. It was adapted by the Akkadians and Hittites to fit their respective Semitic and Indo-European languages. The Elamite, Hurrian, and Urartian peoples also transformed cuneiform to serve their own linguistic needs. Around 1800 BC, the Proto-Sinaitic script appeared in the turquoise mines of the Sinai Peninsula. While it likely drew inspiration from Egyptian hieroglyphics, it also shared conceptual links with Mesopotamian writing, representing a crucial evolutionary leap toward the alphabet. From this script came Phoenician, which then became the parent of the Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and nearly every other modern script in the West and Middle East. This incredible chain of transmission shows how one Sumerian innovation prepared the way for the later information technologies that would transform human communication forever. the very concept of urban civilization, an idea first pioneered in southern Mesopotamia, created a model for human organization that has now been adopted across the entire planet. Today, the dominant mode of human life involves concentrating large populations into planned settlements with highly specialized economic functions. The organizational blueprints first drafted in Sumerian cities, featuring a division of labor, professionalized crafts, and administrative hierarchies, were later borrowed and refined by societies on every continent. Foundational patterns that are still visible in modern city planning were established by the urban template developed in cities like Uruk. A clear spatial boundary between public and private life was created by surrounding monumental civic centers with residential districts. Circulation patterns still found in cities today were set up by street layouts that used main thoroughfares to connect central hubs to the city's edge. Key urban features like administrative centers for record keeping, centralized warehouses for managing resources, and specialized craft zones producing goods for a wider market all have their origins in Sumerian settlements. Even the idea of a civic identity, a feeling of community belonging that transcends kinship, is a Sumerian invention that has globally reshaped human social structures. Human potential was fundamentally broadened by the practical inventions that came out of Sumer. It's hard to overstate the impact of the wheel, possibly their most game-changing creation, which completely transformed both transportation and manufacturing. Irrigation techniques, which they mastered in Mesopotamia's challenging climate, made intensive agriculture possible in diverse environments around the globe. The metallurgical skills first developed by Sumerian artisans also laid the groundwork for technological progress that would ultimately culminate in the modern industrial age. The plow, in particular, stands out as one of Sumer's most crucial technological gifts. Early ox-drawn versions of this tool massively increased agricultural yields by turning soil far more effectively than any handheld implement. This breakthrough not only supported population growth, but also freed up labor, which permitted the kind of social specialization a complex civilization requires. By automatically dropping seeds into freshly cut furrows, Sumerian cedar plows boosted efficiency even further, revolutionizing the capacity for food production. It was these technologies that created the material foundation for all subsequent cultural achievements. What started as mathematical concepts for everyday administrative needs eventually grew into abstract systems with far-reaching applications. We still see the legacy of their sexagesimal system, which uses a base of 60, every time we check the time or measure an angle. The concept of place-value notation, which is essential for any advanced arithmetic, is already fully developed in Sumerian mathematical texts. Thanks to these numerical innovations, they achieved an increasingly complex understanding of quantitative relationships across many different fields. Mathematical tablets from the Neo-Sumerian era reveal astounding computational abilities. They solved problems requiring the calculation of field areas, which demonstrates a clear grasp of geometric principles. Scribes could determine the volumes of canals and large earthworks using sophisticated three-dimensional reasoning. The invention of mathematical reciprocals, numbers that when multiplied equal 1, greatly simplified difficult division problems. The place-value system was perhaps their most vital contribution, as it allowed for the representation of any number, no matter how large or small, with a limited number of symbols, a conceptual leap that made higher mathematics possible. This intellectual framework established by the Sumerians was the basis for later mathematical development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The legal foundations first established in early Sumerian codes would go on to shape later legal traditions across the Near East and the Mediterranean. The very idea that laws should be written down, publicly accessible, and systematically arranged served as the bedrock for all future legal progress. This legal framework was surprisingly modern, anticipating today's systems with features like distinct categories for different crimes, penalties that were adjusted to fit the circumstances, and even detailed procedural rules for conducting trials. The Law Code of Ur-Nammu introduced key legal principles that would be echoed in countless later traditions. One of its central tenets was the assumption that laws must be known to the public and not be arbitrary or secret, thereby establishing a critical foundation for the rule of law. A distinction was made between intentional and unintentional wrongdoing, which created an early basis for considering a person's state of mind in determining guilt. Furthermore, its emphasis on financial compensation over physical retribution introduced principles of proportionality that would influence legal thought for centuries. These ideas were later expanded upon in the Code of Hammurabi. This legal framework, however, was just one part of a vast intellectual inheritance. Sumerian ideas burrowed deep into the world's mythology, creating literary themes that would find new life in countless later cultures. A perfect example is the Great Flood narrative found within the Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains astonishing parallels to subsequent biblical stories. Similarly, creation myths depicting humanity as being molded from clay by divine hands became a cornerstone for a wide array of religious traditions. Foundational principles such as divine judgment, a cosmos kept in balance by the gods, and the intricate relationship between mortals and supernatural powers all laid the groundwork for theological thinking that would resonate for millennia across numerous faiths. The flood story from the Gilgamesh epic, in particular, reads like an uncanny blueprint for later accounts. In this tale, a divinely sent deluge wipes out humankind, with the exception of a single righteous man instructed to construct a giant vessel. Once the floodwaters finally retreat, this lone survivor offers a sacrifice that appeases the gods, leading them to form a covenant that such a cataclysm will never happen again. This exact narrative structure is unmistakably present in the Hebrew Bible's account of Noah, as well as in a host of other flood myths from the ancient Near East. In a similar fashion, Sumerian tales of people being sculpted from clay reverberate through the book of Genesis, and also appear in the mythologies of Greece, the religion of Egypt, and many other world traditions. These recurring patterns demonstrate how Sumerian religious concepts provided an enduring narrative scaffold for exploring life's most profound questions. Yet, despite this incredible and far-reaching legacy, the memory of this foundational civilization vanished entirely for thousands of years. While classical Greek and Roman historians wrote about Babylon, they remained completely oblivious to its Sumerian forerunners. Even biblical references to places like Shinar and Babel gave no indication of the sophisticated culture lying dormant beneath the Mesopotamian sands. It took until the 19th century for dedicated archaeological work to finally begin pulling this forgotten world back into the light. The initial steps were taken by European explorers like Claudius Rich, who traveled to Mesopotamian ruins in 1811, creating the first precise maps and descriptions of these ancient locations. The first true excavations began in the 1840s under Ptolemy Bata and Austin Henry Layard, but while they uncovered magnificent Assyrian palaces, they did not identify the even older Sumerian civilization buried deeper below. The pivotal moment arrived in 1877 at the site of ancient Gersu, when French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzeck discovered statues inscribed in a non-Semitic language, giving the world its first confirmed Sumerian artifacts. This was the discovery that forced scholars to realize Mesopotamian history went back much further than they had ever dreamed. It was the work of Sir Leonard Woolley at Ancient Ur, conducted between 1922 and 1934, that unveiled the true majesty of Sumerian culture to the modern world. His excavation of the city's royal cemetery brought forth a dazzling collection of treasures, from golden headdresses and ornate musical instruments to finely crafted jewelry. These items revealed a degree of technological skill and artistic vision that scholars had not believed possible for the 3rd millennium BC, compelling a complete reevaluation of early human creativity. Woolley's careful excavation methods also provided a stunning window into Sumerian burial rituals. The cemetery held 16 death pits, where rulers were interred alongside their retainers, who had seemingly chosen to follow their masters into the next life. From these graves emerged some of antiquity's most iconic artifacts: the Standard of Ur, the gold and lapis lazuli sculpture known as the Ram in a Thicket, and the breathtaking headdress of Queen Puabi. Perhaps most moving was the unearthing of musical instruments, like a silver lyre adorned with gold and lapis, which forged a direct link to a musical world previously known only through text. These finds not only redefined our understanding of Sumerian art, but also posed deep questions about their society, kingship, and views on death. Just as critical as digging up artifacts was the decipherment of cuneiform script, a monumental achievement that finally allowed the Sumerians to speak for themselves. This painstaking process began with Georg Grotefend's initial analysis of Old Persian inscriptions in 1802 and reached a major milestone with Henry Rawlinson's successful translations of Babylonian texts by the mid-1800s. Over the following decades, generations of academics pored over hundreds of thousands of clay tablets to slowly piece together the Sumerian language, its literature, and its history. Reconstructing Sumerian was exceptionally difficult because it is a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives to offer clues. Edward Hincks was the first to identify the language's agglutinative nature, where grammatical units are stacked onto root words. François Lenormant helped pin down the phonetic values of many signs. Then, in 1869, Jules Oppert officially proposed the name Sumerian, correctly identifying it as the language of ancient Sumer mentioned in Akkadian records. By the turn of the century, scholars like Friedrich Delitzsch and François Thureau-Danguin had built a systematic grammar, paving the way for translations that would reveal the full intellectual brilliance of this ancient people. Today, our picture of Sumer continues to sharpen thanks to ongoing archaeological projects and textual studies. New digital humanities tools are uncovering fresh insights into their economic and administrative systems, while advanced scientific analysis of artifacts reveals hidden details about their manufacturing techniques. This continuous investigation deepens our appreciation for the world's first civilization and the profound impact it left behind, as modern archaeological methods continue to revolutionize our understanding of Sumer. This incredible toolkit is giving us a clearer picture than ever before. From high above, satellite imagery uncovers long-lost water channels and settlement layouts that are otherwise hidden from view. The microscopic study of ancient plant fragments, a field known as archaeobotany, tells us exactly which crops the Sumerians grew and how they farmed. Meanwhile, DNA analysis of ancient remains charts the migrations and family ties of the people, as environmental samples allow us to piece together the very climate that shaped their world. These high-tech methods, when paired with traditional digging and textual studies, paint a far richer picture of the interplay between nature and ingenuity that first sparked urban living. The entire Sumerian journey, from simple farming villages to a revolution in city building, the rise of empires, and their eventual collapse, laid the essential groundwork for every complex society that would follow. The creative ways they tackled environmental and social problems forged cultural blueprints that still resonate in our own time. Through their incredible successes and their ultimate failures, the ancient Sumerians hold up a mirror to us, reflecting both the vast potential and the inherent difficulties of civilization, a lesson that remains deeply relevant as we confront the great challenges of our own age.